is Talk Session. My name is Deidre Moss, and I am the host of Can We Talk? I am an educator, motivator, and a talk connoisseur. My guest today is Dr. David Allen, and today we will be talking about mental health issues and suicide. But before we get into our talk session, I will give Dr. Allen an opportunity to introduce himself. Therefore, I will pass the virtual mic to him. Dr. Allen?
My name is David Allen, and I'm from the Bahamas. Been working here for many years in the community as well as in private work. And it's a joy to be talking to Ms. Mott.
Thank you. Okay, so there's a brief overview of the topic. Dr. Allen, tell us about your credentials. You have a wealth of credentials. You're being very humble.
Mm-hmm. Well, I studied medicine at St. Andrews University in Scotland, and then I did psychiatry and public health at Harvard. And I've done a number of things since then, but my major interest of specialty is the addictions, psychotherapy, and of course, working with the spiritual side of things, because I feel that the psycho-spiritual is where I feel that my talent lies.
Thank you so much. Okay, so Dr. Allen, recently there has been a lot of talk about mental health and mental health issues. Right now, we are living through a pandemic that has impacted the lives of many persons. And although it might be too early to say exactly how the pandemic has impacted mental health, I think that it's safe to say that the pandemic may have had some impact on the mental well-being of some persons. However, within our communities, the issue of mental health seems to have taken a backseat to the issue of physical health and the economy and making sure that our hospitals are not overrun and that people are healthy, vaccinated, masked up, and safe. With that being said, we can get into our session. My first point is, are we doing a good job at addressing mental health issues at the community level?
Well, my work, I feel it's not a time to judge. I think the competent authority has done a pretty good job in the Bahamas, and I think Bahamians are trying as much as they can to cooperate. But the pandemic has meant that there's been limits set on our lifestyle, because by definition, mental health is the ability to love, work, and play with a minimum amount of conflict. What the pandemic has done, it's broke our connections to each other, like church, funerals, Junkanoo, community association. We've had to restrict that. And also it played havoc with our work. Some of us have lost our job, lost our businesses, and there's a tremendous uncertainty and sometimes hopelessness in the country. And of course, playing is difficult. At one point, our beaches were shut down. We had to be careful because Bahamians many times, they love sport, but they also like going out to play recreationally. And we have curfews at 10 o'clock. But all these things are important. But I want to say that the pandemic has been a trauma that has hurt the mental health of us, all of us, whether we've had the COVID virus or not. The whole society has been afflicted. As a result of that, then we've had many different type of mental health issues. You've seen panic attacks increase, depression, anxiety, and particularly even paranoia. But the sad thing is that for some of us, we've felt a kind of hopelessness because we're not sure where things are going to go. We feel that, because we're kind of one horse town tourism, that when that was hurt or threatened, a lot of us are afraid that it meant our country could head for some really serious issues. So Bahamians have been in a very ambivalent situation for the past few months. And even now, we're not sure how things will go in the future. But, we have a deep psycho-spiritual connection in our soul. And so we live in hope. And as long as people are trying to do good things, people serving food, the government helping with the food deliveries, people trying to show love in different ways, even churches and church programs, As long as hopeful things are being done, there's always hope. So hopelessness is really an illusion because it means we've closed our eyes not to see the points of lights of hope around. And if you look at the Bahamas, in spite of the problems, there are many points of lights, and we have to be thankful. And as far as I'm concerned, I am extremely hopeful.
Thank you, Dr. Allen. And another point I would like to bring up is mental health awareness and issues um, that impact mental health. Let me bring attention to your article on the dynamics of suicide. According to the article, during the past few months, the Bahamas has had an increase in suicide and suicidal attempts. Why do you think we are seeing an increase in suicide and suicide attempts?
As we said in the article, we have to be very careful not to equate association with causation. In other words, we have to be careful saying something causes something, and it may be just associated with it. We're not sure what the cause of the increased suicide attempts is caused by, but there is definitely an association with the shutdown of the country and the restriction of our lifestyle. It seems for some persons this has been tremendously traumatic, and particularly young people, and therefore they feel a little bit hopeless, particularly if they don't have a job or they're not happy in their job and they can't see where their career is going. It's also been a strain on our children at home because it means a mother or father has had to become adept in helping the child with their tablets and stuff like that on the internet. And many families don't have that ability right now. And I've met many parents who despair because they feel that their kids are dumbing down and they fear that the future may be a very painful experience for them unless we can catch up again. But again, it's a pandemic. We all have lost things, but in some sense, we've had to go in our hearts and learn some resilience. So this is a time not to be despairing, but to look at what can I do to help myself, to help others, but to keep our faith in God. My point at this time is that in 2014, Keva Bethel did a prospective study where she sent a questionnaire around the islands about people's views on suicide. And to our surprise, 1/3 of the respondents said that yes, they had thought of suicide. So I'm not surprised that after two traumas, Dorian and now the pandemic, that last year our suicide attempts had gone up 1/3 above years before. Now, this is interesting because in our work, we've been able to show there's a correlation between suicide and homicides. Usually, when the homicides are higher, suicides are lower. When homicides come down, suicides go up. Now, the reason for that is we're not sure, but we do know that what happens when a person is deeply hurt, they're traumatized. And if they're a kind of introverted person who is kind of masochistic or centered on themselves, their hurt usually attacks themselves. And that person is most likely to strike out against him or herself rather than others. On the other hand, if a person's extrovertish and is more willing to express their energy outwards, they would express their hurt by hurting others, and therefore you would have homicide. So what you're going to see in the next few months is certainly the continued increase in suicidal attempts, but you'll also see an increase in homicides. And I think you're starting to see that again. From our community contacts, we are told that in certain areas, gang registration has gone up almost 1/3. That worries me because if you notice, some of the killings have happened in ones and twos, and that's very serious. And of course, when things clamp down and money is tough, I have no fear about it. I know the drug world quite well. Drugs will flow again, and when drugs flow, money's involved, and of course, in the gangs, particularly when it comes to drugs, there's swift justice. And so many young men and women play a very risky game, but the end result is very tragic. So what has happened is the lockdown or the limiting lifestyle that the pandemic has put upon us has brought out our pathology in a deeper way. There's more depression, there's more anxiety, there's more paranoia, there's more panic attacks. There's a greater isolationism among in our society. So if you're a person who likes to connect and be with people, it's really hard. Churches are not meeting sometimes. Parties are restricted. Receptions are restricted. Funerals are restricted. Junkanoo is restricted. So you could see with the Bahamian spirit, it's been kind of dampened down. And this dampening down has affected our mental health. But it also challenges us to become resilient. We need to practice our exercise. We need to practice our phone calls. You can call somebody with COVID. You can call somebody who's struggling. Doesn't mean you have to isolate. Now, calling is not the same as seeing somebody face to face, but it does really help. When you do call, call to go. Don't call to talk long. Call to say hello. Call to encourage them. Call to say a prayer. Listen to them for a little bit because it's important that people be listened to. Be quick to listen, slow to speak, and you're slow to anger. So in this time, we have to develop some new habits, using the telephone more appropriately, attending our situation of our exercise appropriately, and being careful of not meeting in groups more than, say, 6 to 10. That is really important. And we have to use our mask and our disinfectants. It's just good sense. Now, the vaccinations are on the way. And personally, I'd like to say here that I feel that WHO will choose a good vaccine. The government has experts involved. So I, for one, will be taking the vaccine when I can take it, because right now my family program has had to shut down because I can't have groups. But I feel when the vaccine comes, I feel we can get our groups started again. So I'm looking forward to that, to start the healing in our community, because the family group carried about 300 people a week in prison and different parts of the community. And we've seen the result of not having those family groups. There have been more suicidal attempts. Some people died. Some died of illness. Some had grieving because of relatives who died from the COVID. And some just feel very isolated, and because they don't have that connection. So we get calls every day asking, when are we starting? So we hope, beside our Zoom, which helps a little bit, we need to get back our community groups, particularly in the prison. I know that's hard, because a lot of the men in the prison over the past 8 years who've been there got tremendous blessing out of our family groups.
Thank you, Dr. Allen. Okay, so connection between the pandemic and mental health. And I know you would have discussed it briefly, but let me again bring attention to your article. The article mentioned that the New York Times has published a post that stated in December, 18 students in Nevada committed suicide. And the study for Centers for Disease Control and Prevention showed that adolescent mental health issues has risen during the pandemic. So there is some connection. Is there a connection between the pandemic and mental health? And as we continue to navigate through the pandemic, how can we protect our mental health, even especially the mental health of adolescents, and teens?
I think that article used in our presentation in the Tribune pinpointed what happened in Nevada. In Nevada, they've had a number of teenage suicides, in fact, 18 in December. And they were able to show that it's associated with the shutdown of the schools. So as a result of that, they're mandated to open all the schools immediately because they felt the lack of socialization. The kids were having Zoom education, or it wasn't having the same socialization effect as meeting in person. So in Nevada, being the picture child of this, they've opened all the schools. I think Chicago is following next. And in the Bahamas, I think we're thinking of opening our government schools on the 22nd of February. I feel this is the right thing to do because I'm a little concerned too that the pandemic is a massive trauma which has affected the soul and heart of our country.
Thank you, Dr. Allen. Also, dynamics of suicide again, an increase in suicide. Another point that the article raised, it addressed the dynamics of suicide. And according to the study, 1/3 of persons or respondents, a study that was done in the Bahamas by Keva Bethel, 1/3, and other persons as well, 1/3 of the respondents admitted that they thought about suicide at some point in their lives. Should we be concerned about the dynamics of suicide in the country?
Well, as the article hinted, I'm concerned that not only are we thinking of suicide, some young people are saying they're not sure that life is worth it. So there's a growing hopelessness in our country, and I think this is also in other parts of the world, and that disturbs me most because hopelessness is an illusion. There are only two feelings in life: love and fear. And so when we are facing a pandemic, something can hurt us, we drift toward, as it were, to fear and move into anxiety, anger, panic, and paralysis, and then hopelessness. We have to make a determined effort during this time to move to the right toward our love, to move our vulnerability. We can't change that because we're all vulnerable, to move that toward love. Once we move toward love, we'll find that we move toward understanding, compassion, forgiveness, and mostly gratitude. Gratitude is the key virtue in this time. You can be grateful for being alive, grateful for what blessing your country has, grateful for the color of the sea, grateful of the beautiful day and the beautiful skies which you've had in the past few days. That gratitude always gives rise to hope. So my feeling at this time, let us reach out to ourselves in love, to our families, to our friends. If you can't reach out in person, reach out by telephone, send a note, send an email. But for goodness sake, reach out in love. If you don't reach out in love, which is going right toward love, you will go left toward fear. Once you go toward fear, the whole thing just bottles up and you move into panic, paralysis, and hopelessness and destruction.
Thank you. And lastly, there's another point that is highlighted in the article, evil violence tunnel. Can you explain what the evil violence tunnel is and its application or relationship with mental health and or suicide?
The evil violence tunnel was coined in my work in America and here. I've worked with a number of people who have killed others, but also who are survivors of severe suicidal attempts. And through my work, I've been able to find 6 stages of the step toward either suicide or homicide. First of all, the person is shamed in earlier life because they either feel rejected, where they feel unlovable, they feel abandoned, where they feel um, they're not what they're supposed to be, or they feel they have been humiliated and they feel like a failure. When failure, unlovable, lovability, and feeling not enough adds up, a person is really shamed. In the community, we call this being dissed. Now, the sad thing is when a person who is dissed or shamed, when they get hurt again, they don't get more shame. They develop what I call murderous rage. And that murderous rage is triggered by somebody hitting your car. You could stab somebody stealing your drugs, somebody stealing your possessions like a watch, somebody cheating with your girlfriend or your husband, somebody losing a job, somebody having a fight or an argument. But there's some trigger where the shaming effect then kicks off the evil violence tunnel, which has 6 components. The first stage, you get cognitive and emotional restriction, like a tunnel vision. You just want to get back at that person who hurt you. The second step is you get psyched, your physiological arousal, your blood pressure goes up, your pulse goes up, and actually your IQ starts to go down. And then the third stage, you start numbing down. You develop something called alexithymia. You can't express words for hard feelings. You can't say, I'm angry, I hate you, you upset me. You repress those feelings, and therefore you have to what? Act them out instead. So you start numbing down. And this is contributed to by the taking of various substances, like, for example, strong alcohol, brandy, gin, or whiskey, or drugs like marijuana, or even liquid ecstasy, or some types of cocaine. Once that happens, you enter the fourth stage where you're filled with negative energy or anger, and you become totally destructive. The Bible speaks about this in Ephesians 4 and 27. Do not let the sun sit on your anger in order not to give the evil one a foothold into your heart. Many of us have let anger sit on our heart for many years, and sadly, we've sown to the wind, and now we're reaping the whirlwind. The fifth stage is you have value or character fragmentation. The values break apart, nothing good's going to happen, and then you have repetitive destruction. If you are a kind of person who is withdrawn and narcissistic, you most likely will go to self-injury. If you're not, you will then project your hurt in your heart onto somebody else, and you will hurt them and produce a homicide or injure somebody else. The sad thing about all this is that after this is done, it's almost like you go into a state where you are feeling sad, down, but then after a while, that lifts and you almost can get the energy to hurt again. So there's a little mystery here, and there's a lot we don't understand. The other thing we found is with people who survive suicide, a lot of those who survive claim they heard a voice saying not to do it. My puzzle is that why do some people hear a voice saying stop and others don't? I don't know. Is that a spiritual thing? Is that something from our unconscious or our subconscious? But that's been my experience, that people who have survived severe suicidal attempts, many of them told me they heard a voice that distinctively said stop. Remember one case where a lady was driving over Clifton Pier and her baby who was 9 months who couldn't speak, a kid just shouted, stop, stop. And the mother just stopped and she's still alive. But they all told me that once they hit down the third stage or the fourth stage, they see it almost impossible for somebody to stop them. It's like they move from a small wind behind them to a massive wind, and they move on toward the suicide and homicide. There's a definite connection between suicides and homicides. And the only way to cope with that, the police work has to be done, but you have to raise the consciousness of the society and increase the bonding, the intimacy bonding in the society. And the best way to do that, jaw stops war. You got to talk, you got to share, you have to connect. If you don't connect, you live disconnected. If you live disconnected, then you're willing to hurt people. You'll get more anger and you'll get more violence and more destruction.
Thank you, Dr. Allen. Very enlightening, very enlightening. And so as we close, are there any other comments that you would like to add?
The most important thing I want to say is that I'm worried about our children, because a hurt child is a dangerous adult to themselves, but also to the society. And sadly, in working with our children in our country, there are many good things are being done by the judiciary, the police, education, the church, but somehow we don't seem to connect with each other. So we have a silo effect. And if you work with children with a silo effect, even though you're doing good work, it's still not going to be effective. So many of our kids are shrouded in a shame cocoon of early childhood and early childhood sexual abuse and early childhood physical abuse, and also early childhood deprivation. This is very silent, but it starts to show itself in the teen years, and it blows out in later years in mental health issues, but also in suicide as well as homicide. The other thing we found is, and the studies show this, that you also have higher rates of physiological illness, hypertension, obesity, and diabetes. So it seems to me with the adverse child experience studies showing that a hurt child is vulnerable to mental health issues, but also vulnerable to medical issues as well. As you know, in our country, we have a challenge with the violence, homicide, and now suicides, illnesses of hypertension, diabetes, and obesity. Well, could it be? My hypothesis that the real challenge is we have to now grab our children and make sure they're safe. Because as I've said before, a hurt child is a to the society as a whole.
Dr. Allen, thank you. Thank you for enlightening and sharing this information. It's
You're welcome.
Very valuable and within our community. And as we see the increase in different issues that arise as a result of mental health, this is a discussion that we need to have. And so today I want to thank you for your contribution again. I want to thank our audience for listening to the talk. And I would like to thank our viewers for listening in. like our page for future notifications for upcoming talk sessions. And you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you and good day.